The desert sun blazed mercilessly over Edwards Air Force Base as Captain Rebecca Rivet Thompson knelt beside the massive landing gear of her F-4 Phantom, her hands methodically checking each hydraulic line with the precision of a surgeon. Aircraft towered above her like a metallic predator, its twin engines silent, but radiating heat from the California morning. Her checklist, laminated and worn from constant use, contained 247 individual inspection points that she had personally developed over 8 years of flying the most temperamental fighter jet in the Air Force inventory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thompson, what the hell are you doing out there? The voice belonged to Colonel Frank Garrison, the squadron commander who had made his opinion of female pilots abundantly clear during his 30-year career. He stood in the hangar doorway, his arms crossed and his weathered face twisted into its perpetual scowl. Behind him, a cluster of younger pilots snickered as they watched Rebecca's painstaking inspection routine. "Pre-flight inspection, sir," Rebecca replied without looking up from the Phantom's nose gear assembly. She was examining the torque links with a small flashlight, checking for stress fractures that standard maintenance might miss. "I've identified 17 potential failure points that aren't covered in the standard checklist." Lieutenant Jake Harrison, fresh from flight school and eager to prove himself among the squadron's elite pilots, rolled his eyes dramatically. "Rivet's doing her little ritual again. I swear she takes longer checking that bird than it takes to fly a mission." The other pilots erupted in laughter. Captain Steve Mitchell, known for his aggressive flying style and dismissive attitude toward protocol, shook his head in mock amazement. "Thompson, that Phantom flew combat missions in Vietnam before you were born. If it was going to break, don't you think it would have broken by now?" Rebecca continued her inspection, running her fingers along the aircraft's wing route where metal fatigue typically developed first. The F-4 Phantom was a 40-year-old design, built during an era when speed and power mattered more than reliability. Every aircraft in their squadron had accumulated thousands of flight hours, and Rebecca had developed an intimate understanding of where these machines were most likely to fail. Her father, a career maintenance chief, had taught her that aircraft don't just break randomly, they give warnings to those who know how to listen. "Sir," Rebecca said, finally standing and facing Colonel Garrison, "this aircraft has accumulated 4,847 flight hours across multiple decades of service. The manufacturer's original design specifications assumed a 20-year service life with regular component replacement. We're flying machines that are operating beyond their intended parameters, in conditions more demanding than their original design requirements." Colonel Garrison's face reddened. "Thompson, are you questioning the Air Force's maintenance protocols? Because if you are, I can arrange for you to explain your concerns to the base engineering officer." "No, sir, I'm supplementing those protocols based on operational experience and engineering analysis." Rebecca held up her personal checklist, filled with technical diagrams and handwritten notes. "Standard pre-flight inspection covers basic airworthiness. My expanded checklist identifies potential failures before they become catastrophic." Lieutenant Harrison laughed again. "Listen to her talking like she designed the damn thing. Rivet, you do realize that thousands of pilots have flown Phantoms without your little inspection dance, right?" Rebecca turned to face the young pilot, her brown eyes steady and calm. "Lieutenant, how many hours do you have in the F-4? 87 hours, Harrison replied with pride. "Top of my class at Luke Air Force Base. I have 1,200 hours in the Phantom across 6 years of operations," Rebecca said quietly. "During that time, I've experienced 14 mechanical failures that could have been fatal if not detected during pre-flight inspection. 3 of those failures occurred in aircraft that had passed standard maintenance inspection the same morning. Captain Mitchell stepped forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm. So what you're saying, Thompson, is that Air Force maintenance crews don't know their jobs? That our certified mechanics are missing obvious problems? I'm saying that maintenance crews are overworked, understaffed, and responsible for dozens of aircraft with different maintenance schedules and requirements, Rebecca replied. They do excellent work under difficult conditions, but they're focused on major systems and scheduled maintenance intervals. My inspection catches the subtle signs of developing problems. She gestured toward her Phantom's engine intake. Yesterday, I found metal filings in the number 2 engine's compressor inlet. Microscopic particles that indicated bearing wear in the high-pressure turbine. Maintenance replaced the bearing assembly and found advanced deterioration that would have caused catastrophic engine failure within 10 flight hours. The group of pilots exchanged glances. Colonel Garrison's expression softened slightly, though his voice remained stern. Thompson, even if your inspection methods have merit, the time you spend on these elaborate checks delays our training schedule. We have operational readiness requirements to meet. Rebecca nodded respectfully. Sir, my expanded pre-flight inspection adds 18 minutes to standard preparation time. The squadron's operational tempo allows for that additional time without impacting mission schedules. 18 minutes multiplied by every pilot in the squadron would significantly impact our efficiency, Lieutenant Harrison pointed out. Maybe your way works for you, but the rest of us can't spend half an hour looking for problems that probably don't exist. Rebecca walked over to Harrison's assigned F-4, parked 30 feet away. The aircraft looked identical to hers, but she had noticed several subtle indicators during her morning walk-through of the flight line. Lieutenant, when did you last check your aircraft's hydraulic reservoir levels? During yesterday's post-flight inspection, Harrison replied confidently. Everything was within normal parameters. Rebecca knelt beside the aircraft's hydraulic access panel and pointed to a small stain on the concrete beneath the aircraft. This fluid stain wasn't here 3 days ago. It's hydraulic fluid, not engine oil. The coloration indicates it's from the primary flight control system, not the landing gear hydraulics. She opened the access panel and pointed to the reservoir sight gauge. Your primary hydraulic system has lost approximately 1 quart of fluid since yesterday's inspection. The leak is slow enough that it doesn't trigger warning systems, but fast enough that you could lose complete flight control authority during an extended mission. Harrison's cocky expression faded as he examined the evidence. Colonel Garrison moved closer, his professional curiosity overriding his skepticism. How did you spot this? Fluid stains on concrete tell a story, Rebecca explained. Fresh hydraulic fluid is bright red and has a specific viscosity. As it ages and is exposed to heat and air, it darkens and becomes thicker. This stain is approximately 18 hours old, based on its color and the way it's spread across the concrete texture. Captain Mitchell crossed his arms defensively. So you're telling us you can determine the age of a fluid leak by looking at a stain? Rebecca smiled. Captain, fluid dynamics and materials analysis were part of my aerospace engineering degree at the Air Force Academy. But mostly, I learned this from my father, who spent 28 years as a maintenance chief. He taught me that aircraft communicate with those who pay attention. She stood and brushed dust from her flight suit. Every aircraft has a unique personality based on its service history, component wear patterns, and operational stress. Standard inspections verify that major systems are functional. Detailed inspections reveal what the aircraft is trying to tell you about its condition. Colonel Garrison was examining Harrison's hydraulic leak with genuine interest. Thompson, have you documented these inspection techniques? Yes, sir. I've been developing a comprehensive manual that correlates observable indicators with potential mechanical failures. The data is based on maintenance records from our squadron plus 12 other F-4 units across different bases and operational environments. Lieutenant Harrison was now checking his own aircraft's hydraulic system, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by concern. "Rivet, if this leak had continued, what would have happened during flight?" Rebecca consulted her technical manual, flipping to a section filled with diagrams and failure analysis charts. Primary hydraulic failure in the F-4 results in loss of flight control boost. The aircraft becomes extremely difficult to control, especially during high-G maneuvers or emergency situations. Depending on when the failure occurs, it could range from a challenging landing to complete loss of aircraft control. The group fell silent as the implications sank in. Captain Mitchell looked uncomfortable. "So you're saying Harrison could have died because of a hydraulic leak that nobody else noticed?" "I'm saying that early detection of developing problems prevents in-flight emergencies," Rebecca replied diplomatically. "The F-4 is an incredibly robust aircraft, but it requires respect and attention to detail." Colonel Garrison closed the hydraulic access panel and turned to face the assembled pilots. "Thompson, I want you to brief the entire squadron on your inspection procedures. And I want you to review every aircraft in our inventory using your expanded checklist." "Sir, that would require approximately 6 hours per aircraft for a comprehensive inspection," Rebecca said. "With 18 aircraft in our squadron, that's over a week of dedicated inspection time." "Do it," Garrison ordered. "If your methods can prevent even one accident, they're worth the time investment." As the group dispersed, Rebecca returned to her own aircraft to complete her inspection routine. She had examined the Phantom's major systems, but her checklist included dozens of additional items that most pilots considered unnecessary. She checked the condition of rivets along stress concentration points, looking for the slight discoloration that indicated developing cracks. She examined the aircraft's electrical connections for corrosion or loose contacts that could cause intermittent failures during flight. Her most detailed attention focused on the Phantom's twin J79 engines, temperamental power plants known for their complexity and maintenance requirements. Rebecca checked the engine inlet screens for foreign object damage, examined the variable inlet ramps for proper alignment, and verified that all external sensors and probes were secure and undamaged. The engines themselves received a thorough visual inspection. Rebecca checked for oil leaks, examined the exhaust nozzles for damage or unusual wear patterns, and verified that all external lines and connections were properly secured. She had developed a keen eye for the subtle signs that indicated developing engine problems. Slight discoloration of metal components that suggested excessive heat, vibration patterns that could indicate bearing wear, or unusual sounds during engine operation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As she worked, Rebecca reflected on the resistance she consistently faced from her fellow pilots. The Air Force had only recently begun accepting women into combat roles, and many male pilots viewed her presence as an unwelcome political experiment. They questioned her flying ability, her technical competence, and her right to be there. Her meticulous approach to aircraft inspection was seen as evidence of feminine overcautiousness rather than professional expertise. But Rebecca had learned early in her career that competence was her only defense against discrimination. She couldn't afford to make mistakes or cut corners, because any failure would be attributed to her gender rather than normal human error. Her father had taught her that excellence was not negotiable, that she would have to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. The irony was that her attention to detail, born from necessity and reinforced by engineering training, had made her one of the squadron's most knowledgeable pilots. She understood the F-4 Phantom at a level that went beyond basic airmanship. She knew how the aircraft systems interacted, how component wear affected performance, and how to read the subtle signs that indicated developing problems. Her expanded pre-flight checklist had evolved over years of experience and study. Each item represented a lesson learned, often from near misses or incidents that could have been prevented with better inspection procedures. Rebecca had researched every F-4 accident report available, looking for patterns and common failure modes that standard inspection procedures might miss. The result was a comprehensive system that treated each aircraft as an individual machine, with its own history and characteristics. Rebecca didn't just verify that systems were functional. She assessed their condition, predicted their remaining service life, and identified potential problems before they became dangerous. As she completed her inspection and prepared for the day's training mission, Rebecca noticed a staff car approaching the flight line. The vehicle carried base engineering personnel, including Dr. Patricia Wells, the civilian engineer responsible for aircraft structural analysis. Dr. Wells had been monitoring the squadron's maintenance practices as part of a broader Air Force study on aging aircraft reliability. "Captain Thompson," Dr. Wells called as she exited the vehicle. "I've been reviewing your inspection reports and the maintenance data correlation you've been developing. I'd like to discuss your methodology." Rebecca secured her checklist and walked over to meet the engineering team. Dr. Wells was a respected expert in aircraft structural analysis, someone whose opinion carried significant weight within the Air Force's technical community. "Dr. Wells, I appreciate your interest in the expanded inspection procedures," Rebecca said. "I've been trying to bridge the gap between operational experience and engineering analysis." Dr. Wells nodded approvingly. "Captain, your correlation between observable indicators and mechanical failure modes is remarkably sophisticated. Have you considered that your inspection techniques might have applications beyond the F-4 program?" Rebecca felt a surge of professional satisfaction. After years of having her methods dismissed or ridiculed, it was gratifying to have them recognized by someone with Dr. Wells' credentials. "Ma'am, I believe these principles could be adapted to any aircraft type, but each platform would require specific analysis based on its design characteristics and operational history." "I agree completely," Dr. Wells replied. "In fact, I'd like to discuss the possibility of documenting your procedures for broader distribution within the Air Force. Your approach could significantly improve flight safety across multiple aircraft types." As Rebecca prepared for her morning flight, she reflected on the strange position she occupied within the squadron. Her fellow pilots viewed her as an overly cautious perfectionist, whose elaborate inspection routines reflected feminine anxiety rather than professional competence. But engineering professionals recognized her methods as sophisticated technical analysis that could prevent accidents and save lives. The truth was that Rebecca's approach to flying was shaped by her understanding that the F-4 Phantom was an unforgiving aircraft that demanded respect and attention to detail. She had seen too many incidents that could have been prevented with better inspection procedures. Too many pilots who had learned the hard way that cutting corners in aviation could have fatal consequences. As she climbed into her Phantom's cockpit and began her pre-flight checklist, Rebecca had no way of knowing that her meticulous attention to detail would soon be put to the ultimate test. Somewhere in the vast California desert, events were already in motion that would prove the value of her supposedly unnecessary inspection procedures in the most dramatic way possible. 3 days after Rebecca's squadron briefing on expanded inspection procedures, the morning alarm at Edwards Air Force Base shattered the pre-dawn silence with an urgency that made every pilot's blood run cold. The klaxon wasn't the routine revelation or training alert. It was the emergency scramble signal that meant a real-world crisis. Rebecca bolted upright in her quarters, instantly alert. Through her window, she could see aircraft hangar lights blazing and ground crews racing across the tarmac with the controlled chaos that marked genuine emergency response. Her watch showed 0347 hours, and the base was transforming from its normal peacetime routine into a fully operational war machine. Squadron briefing room buzzed with tense energy as pilots filed in wearing hastily donned flight suits. Colonel Garrison stood at the front of the room, his face grim as he studied classified teletype messages that had been arriving throughout the night. Behind him, a large map of the southwestern United States displayed weather patterns and restricted airspace zones. "Gentlemen," Garrison began, then caught himself and nodded toward Rebecca. "And lady, we have a code red situation. At 0200 hours this morning, a civilian research aircraft conducting high-altitude atmospheric studies experienced catastrophic mechanical failure over the Nevada test range." He activated the briefing room's projection system, displaying grainy radar images and aircraft specifications. The aircraft is a modified Lockheed U-2 Dragon Lady operated by the National Atmospheric Research Institute. On board are Dr. James Patterson, a Nobel Prize-winning atmospheric physicist, and Captain Linda Rodriguez, a former Air Force pilot with extensive high-altitude experience. Lieutenant Harrison raised his hand. "Sir, why is this our problem? Shouldn't search and rescue handle civilian aircraft emergencies?" Colonel Garrison's expression darkened. "Because, Lieutenant, the aircraft was conducting classified research into upper atmosphere nuclear radiation patterns. Dr. Patterson's work is critical to national defense, and the data he's carrying cannot fall into foreign hands. Additionally, the aircraft is currently flying at 68,000 feet with partial power loss and degraded flight controls." Rebecca felt her stomach tighten as she processed the implications. The U-2 Dragon Lady was notoriously difficult to fly under normal conditions, with flight characteristics that challenged even the most experienced pilots. At extreme altitude with mechanical problems, the aircraft would be nearly impossible to control. Captain Mitchell leaned forward in his seat. "Sir, what exactly can we do to help? Our F-4 South have a service ceiling of about 60,000 feet, and that's pushing the envelope. We can't reach a U-2 at 68,000 feet. Under normal circumstances, you're correct," Garrison replied. "But this U-2 is descending slowly due to its mechanical problems. Intelligence estimates it will reach 55,000 feet within 2 hours, putting it within the F-4's operational envelope." He moved to a detailed tactical display showing the aircraft's projected flight path. The U-2's navigation systems are partially functional, but radio communication is intermittent. The pilot is attempting to guide the aircraft toward a suitable landing site, but she's fighting severe control problems and has limited fuel remaining. Dr. Wells entered the briefing room carrying a thick folder of technical documents. "Gentlemen, I've been analyzing the U-2's reported mechanical failures based on radio transmissions received by Nellis Air Force Base. The aircraft has suffered a catastrophic failure of its primary hydraulic system, resulting in severely degraded flight control authority." She distributed technical diagrams showing the U-2's flight control configuration. "The Dragon Lady relies on hydraulic boost for all primary flight controls. Without hydraulic assistance, the aircraft requires enormous physical strength to control, especially at high altitude where control surface effectiveness is reduced." Rebecca studied the technical data with growing concern. She had researched high-altitude flight characteristics as part of her aerospace engineering studies, and she understood the challenges facing the U-2 pilot. "Dr. Wells, with partial hydraulic failure, what are the aircraft's chances of executing a successful landing?" Dr. Wells' expression was grave. "Captain Thompson, under ideal conditions with a prepared runway and perfect weather, perhaps 30%. But the U-2 must land at a specific airspeed within a very narrow margin of error. Too fast, and the aircraft will destroy its landing gear. Too slow, and it will stall and crash." Colonel Garrison activated another display showing potential landing sites within the aircraft's range. The nearest suitable runway is at Nellis Air Force Base, 180 miles northeast of the aircraft's current position. However, meteorology reports increasing winds and deteriorating visibility due to an approaching storm system. Lieutenant Harrison studied the weather data with obvious concern. "Sir, if the U-2 can't maintain stable flight control, how can it navigate to Nellis in bad weather?" "That's where we come in," Garrison replied. "Our mission is to intercept the U-2, establish visual contact, and provide navigation assistance and flight stability guidance. The F-4's twin-engine configuration and superior maneuverability at medium altitudes make it the only aircraft capable of flying alongside the U-2 during its descent." Rebecca raised her hand. "Sir, what specific assistance can we provide once we establish contact?" Garrison gestured toward a communication specialist who had been monitoring radio transmissions. "Sergeant Davis has been in intermittent contact with Captain Rodriguez in the U-2. Sergeant, brief the pilots on the situation." "Sergeant." Davis activated a recording of the most recent radio transmission. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through static, strained but professional. "Edwards control, aircraft control is extremely marginal. I'm fighting severe pitch oscillations and have lost most roll authority. Navigation is difficult due to instrument failures. I can maintain approximately the current heading but cannot execute precise course corrections." The recording continued with technical details that painted a picture of an aircraft barely under control. Rodriguez reported that her altitude was decreasing steadily despite her efforts to maintain level flight, that her fuel quantity was uncertain due to gauge failures, and that she was experiencing severe fatigue from fighting the aircraft's control problems. Dr. Wells provided additional technical context. "The U-2's flight characteristics make it extremely sensitive to weight and balance changes. As fuel is consumed, the aircraft's center of gravity shifts, requiring constant trim adjustments that are nearly impossible without proper hydraulic assistance." Colonel Garrison outlined the mission profile. "We'll launch 4 F-4s in 2-ship formations. The primary formation will establish contact with the U-2 and provide direct assistance. The secondary formation will maintain communication relay and standby support." He pointed to the duty roster displayed on the briefing room wall. "Harrison and Mitchell will fly the secondary formation. Thompson and Barnes will fly primary formation as lead and wingmen." Lieutenant Harrison's face showed obvious disappointment. "Sir, why isn't a more experienced pilot leading the primary formation?" "Thompson has excellent technical knowledge, but this mission requires tactical flying skills." Rebecca felt the familiar sting of having her competence questioned. "But Colonel..." Garrison's response surprised her. "Lieutenant, Captain Thompson has logged more high-altitude flight time than any other pilot in this squadron. Her experience with aircraft systems analysis and emergency procedures makes her uniquely qualified for this mission. Captain Barnes, Rebecca's assigned wingman, was a steady pilot with 8 years of F-4 experience." He nodded approvingly at the mission assignment. "Rivet's the right choice for this one. Her attention to technical details could make the difference between a successful rescue and a disaster." Dr. Wells added her professional endorsement. "Captain Thompson's understanding of aircraft systems and failure analysis will be crucial for assessing the U-2's condition and providing appropriate guidance to Captain Rodriguez." As the briefing concluded and pilots began preparing for launch, Rebecca felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had spent years proving herself through meticulous attention to detail and technical expertise, but this mission would test her abilities in ways she had never experienced. The pre-flight preparation took on new urgency as Rebecca conducted her expanded inspection routine on her assigned F-4. Every system check carried additional importance because mechanical failure during the rescue mission could doom not only her own crew but also the U-2 and its occupants. She paid particular attention to her aircraft's communication systems, navigation equipment, and high-altitude performance capabilities. The mission would require precise formation flying at the edge of the F-4's operational envelope, demanding perfect coordination between aircraft systems and pilot skills. Captain Barnes watched Rebecca's inspection procedure with newfound respect. "Rivet, I never fully appreciated how thorough your pre-flight checks are. But for a mission like this, I'm glad you don't cut corners." Rebecca smiled as she verified the condition of her aircraft's oxygen system. "Captain, this U-2 is in trouble. Because something failed that probably looked fine during pre-flight inspection. I don't want us to experience the same problem at 55,000 feet." As they completed their preparations and prepared to taxi for takeoff, Sergeant Davis approached with updated information from the U-2. "Captain Thompson, we've received another transmission from Captain Rodriguez. The aircraft's condition is deteriorating more rapidly than expected." The radio message was brief but alarming. "Edwards Control, I'm experiencing severe flutter in the left wing. Aircraft are becoming increasingly difficult to control. I estimate I can maintain controlled flight for perhaps 90 minutes before structural failure becomes likely." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken as she processed the implications. Wing flutter at high altitude could lead to catastrophic structural failure that would destroy the aircraft instantly. The rescue mission had just become a race against time, with the lives of 2 people hanging in the balance. Colonel Garrison's voice came over the radio. As the F-4S prepared for takeoff, "All aircraft, launch immediately. The U-2 is in greater danger than we initially assessed. Captain Thompson, you have tactical command once airborne. Bring them home." As Rebecca advanced her throttles and felt her F-4 Phantom accelerate down the runway, she realized that her years of meticulous preparation and attention to detail were about to face the ultimate test. Somewhere in the vast Nevada sky, an aircraft was dying slowly, carrying 2 people whose survival depended on her ability to apply her technical knowledge under the most demanding conditions imaginable. The early morning sun painted the California desert in shades of gold and red as 4 F-4 Phantoms climbed rapidly toward their intercept altitude. Rebecca monitored her aircraft systems with intense concentration, knowing that the slightest mechanical problem could compromise the entire mission. Through her radio, she could hear intermittent transmissions from the U-2 as Captain Rodriguez continued her desperate fight to maintain control of the damaged aircraft. Each transmission revealed new problems, increasing control difficulty, uncertain fuel quantity, and growing structural concerns that turned the rescue mission into a race against time. As her F-4 climbed through 40,000 feet and continued toward the intercept altitude, Rebecca reflected on the irony of her situation. For years, her fellow pilots had mocked her attention to detail and systematic approach to aircraft inspection. Now those same qualities were being relied upon to save 2 lives in one of the most challenging rescue missions ever attempted. The radio crackled with updates from ground control, weather reports, and status checks from the other F-4S in the formation. But Rebecca's attention was focused on the technical challenge ahead, intercepting a damaged aircraft at extreme altitude and somehow providing the guidance and support necessary to bring it safely to the ground. She had studied every available technical manual on the U-2 Dragon Lady, analyzed its flight characteristics and emergency procedures, and consulted with Dr. Wells about the specific problems affecting the aircraft. But theoretical knowledge would only carry her so far. The success of the mission would ultimately depend on her ability to apply that knowledge under conditions of extreme stress and time pressure. As the F-4 formation approached intercept altitude, Rebecca keyed her radio and spoke the words that would begin the most important mission of her career. "Control, this is Falcon Lead. We're at mission altitude and beginning to search for the target aircraft." At 52,000 feet above the Nevada desert, Rebecca's F-4 Phantom cut through the thin atmosphere like a metallic shark, its twin engines producing contrails that dissipated instantly in the bone-dry air. The cockpit's environmental systems worked, Overtime to maintain pressurization and oxygen flow at an altitude where the sky had turned deep purple and the curvature of the Earth was clearly visible below. "Falcon Lead, this is Control," crackled the radio transmission from Edwards. "Radar shows the target aircraft bearing 047 degrees. Range 32 miles, altitude 56,000 feet and descending. The weather update indicates a storm front approaching. From the northwest, visibility decreasing to less than 5 miles and precipitation." Rebecca adjusted her radar settings, scanning the sky ahead for any sign of the U-2. At this altitude, the Dragon Lady would be nearly invisible to the naked eye, a black speck against the vast emptiness of the upper atmosphere. "Control, Falcon. Lead copies. Beginning intercept vector." Captain Barnes, flying as her wingman in the second F-4, maintained perfect formation position despite the challenging flight conditions. "Rivet, my radar's picking up something at the edge of detection. Range, looks like a slow-moving target at high altitude." Rebecca fine-tuned her own radar display, adjusting the sensitivity and range settings based on her knowledge of the U-2's radar signature characteristics. The Dragon Lady had been designed for stealth operations with a minimal radar cross-section. That made detection difficult even under ideal conditions. "Tally-ho," Rebecca announced as her radar finally locked onto the target. "I have contact. Target bearing 052 degrees, range 24 miles, altitude 55,200 feet. Barnes, close-up formation. We're going to need precise coordination for this intercept." As they approached the U-2, Rebecca began transmitting on the emergency frequency that Captain Rodriguez was monitoring. "Dragon Lady, this is Falcon Lead. We have you in sight and are moving to intercept. Please respond with your current status." The response came through heavy static, Captain Rodriguez's voice strained with fatigue and stress. "Falcon Lead, Dragon Lady. Thank God you're here. Aircraft control is marginal and getting worse. I'm fighting constant pitch oscillations and have lost most roll authority. The fuel gauge is fluctuating between empty and quarter full, so I have no reliable fuel quantity indication." Rebecca closed to within visual range of the U-2, and what she saw sent a chill through her professional composure. The aircraft was clearly in distress, its flight path wavering as Captain Rodriguez struggled to maintain control. The U-2's distinctive long wings were flexing visibly, and Rebecca could see that the left wing was experiencing the flutter that had been reported earlier. "Dragon Lady, Falcon Lead has you visual," Rebecca transmitted. "I can see your aircraft configuration. The left wing flutter appears to be concentrated near the wing root junction. Are you experiencing any unusual vibrations or control feedback?" "Affirmative. Falcon Lead, the vibration is getting stronger, and I'm having to use increasing control input to maintain level flight. My hands and arms are cramping from fighting the controls." Rebecca maneuvered her F-4 into a position alongside the U-2, maintaining a separation of about 200 feet to avoid any potential debris if the Dragon Lady experienced structural failure. From this close range, she could conduct a detailed visual inspection of the damaged aircraft. What she observed confirmed her worst fears. The U-2's left wing showed clear signs of structural stress, with visible deformation along the wings, leading edge and irregular flex patterns that indicated compromised internal structure. The aircraft's control surfaces were moving erratically as Captain Rodriguez fought to maintain stability. "Barnes, take position on the U-2's right side," Rebecca instructed her wingman. "I need you to observe the aircraft's overall condition, while I focus on the specific problem areas." Captain Barnes smoothly moved his F-4 into position, his years of formation flying experience evident in the precision of his aircraft handling. "Rivet, I can see fuel vapor streaming from somewhere near the U-2's wing root. It looks like they might have a fuel leak in addition to the hydraulic problems." Rebecca keyed her radio to contact Edwards Control. "Control, Falcon Lead, we have Established visual contact with the Dragon Lady. Aircraft condition is worse than initially reported. I observe structural flutter in the left wing, possible fuel leak, and severe control problems. Recommend immediate vector to nearest suitable landing field. Falcon Lead, control copies. Nellis Air Force Base is still your best option, bearing 086 degrees, distance 127 miles. Be advised that weather conditions at Nellis are deteriorating rapidly. Winds are gusting to 40 knots with visibility dropping due to dust storms. Rebecca. Process this information while maintaining visual contact with the struggling U-2. Landing a damaged high-altitude aircraft in gusty winds would be extremely dangerous, but they had no choice. The Dragon Lady's condition was deteriorating too rapidly to search for alternative landing sites. Dragon Lady, Falcon Lead. We're going to guide you to Nellis Air Force Base. I need you to follow my navigation guidance precisely. Are you able to execute gentle course corrections? Captain Rodriguez's response revealed the extent of her control problems. Falcon Lead. I can make small heading changes, but they require enormous physical effort. My control inputs have to be very gradual, and I can't make any abrupt maneuvers without risking loss of control. Rebecca began planning the navigation route to Nellis, taking into account the U-2's limited maneuverability and the approaching weather system. She would need to guide the Dragon Lady along a course that minimized the need for sharp turns while avoiding restricted airspace and potential turbulence areas. Control. Falcon Lead requesting priority routing to Nellis. We need a direct course with minimal turns and clearance through all restricted areas. This aircraft cannot execute standard navigation procedures. Falcon Lead, control copies. You are cleared directly by Nellis via waypoint Charlie 79er. All other traffic has been diverted, and you have priority handling. As Rebecca began guiding the U-2 toward Nellis, she noticed that the aircraft's descent rate was increasing. Captain Rodriguez was losing altitude faster than she could control, which meant they had limited time to reach the base before the Dragon Lady descended below its minimum controllable airspeed. Dragon Lady, what's your current airspeed? Rebecca asked, knowing that the U-2's flight envelope at high altitude was critically narrow. Falcon Lead, I'm showing 180 knots indicated, but the instruments are unreliable. The aircraft feels like it's on the edge of a stall, but I can't add power without causing severe pitch oscillations. Rebecca understood the dilemma immediately. The U-2's high-altitude performance required precise airspeed control, but the hydraulic problems made such precision impossible. Captain Rodriguez was trapped in a deteriorating situation, where any control input could trigger a catastrophic loss of control. Barnes, move in closer, Rebecca instructed. I want you to observe the U-2's flight characteristics and help me assess its performance envelope. Captain Barnes positioned his F-4 within 100 feet of the U-2's right wing, close enough to observe subtle changes in the aircraft's flight attitude and control surface positions. Rivet, the U-2's control surfaces are moving constantly. It looks like Rodriguez is having to make continuous corrections just to maintain approximately level flight. Rebecca began applying her knowledge of aircraft systems and aerodynamics to develop a strategy for bringing the U-2 safely to Nellis. She understood that the Dragon Lady's problems went beyond simple hydraulic failure. The aircraft was experiencing multiple cascading failures that were creating an increasingly unstable flight condition. Dragon Lady, I want you to try something. Rebecca transmitted. Reduce your power setting very gradually until you feel the aircraft's pitch oscillations stabilize. Don't worry about the descent rate for now. We need to find a power setting where the aircraft is controllable. Captain Rodriguez acknowledged and began the delicate process of adjusting her throttle. Rebecca watched carefully as the U-2's flight characteristics changed, noting how the aircraft's stability improved as power was reduced, but at the cost of an increased descent rate. That's better, Falcon Lead. The pitch oscillations are less severe, but I'm descending at about 800 feet per minute now. Rebecca quickly calculated the time and distance remaining to Nellis. At the current descent rate, the U-2 would reach its minimum controllable altitude about 20 miles short of the base. They needed to either reduce the descent rate or find a way to extend the aircraft's glide performance. Control, Falcon Lead. We need an immediate vector to the closest emergency landing strip. The Dragon Lady cannot maintain altitude to reach Nellis. Falcon Lead, stand by. The pause seemed to last forever before Control responded. Falcon Lead, there's an emergency strip at Creech Air Force Base. Bearing 078 degrees, a distance 62 miles. The runway is 8,000 feet long, but has minimal support facilities. Rebecca evaluated this new option. Creech was closer, but landing a damaged U-2 at an unfamiliar airfield with limited emergency support would be extremely risky. However, it might be their only chance to get the Dragon Lady on the ground before structural failure made landing impossible. Dragon Lady, we're diverting to Creech Air Force Base. It's closer, but you'll need to execute a very precise approach. The runway is adequate, but we'll only get one chance at this. Understood, Falcon Lead. Just guide me in. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. Rebecca felt the weight of responsibility as she began planning the approach to Creech. Captain Rodriguez was placing complete trust in her technical knowledge and flying skills, and any mistaken guidance could result in a fatal crash. The approaching storm system was creating increasingly turbulent conditions, and Rebecca could see dust clouds rising from the desert floor as winds intensified. Landing the U-2 in these conditions would require perfect timing and precise coordination between both aircraft. Barnes, I need you to monitor our fuel status, Rebecca instructed. We're burning a lot of gas-maintaining formation at this altitude, and we might need reserve fuel for multiple approach attempts. Captain Barnes checked his fuel gauges and performed rapid calculations. Rivet, we have about 40 minutes of fuel remaining at current consumption rates. If we need to make more than one approach attempt, we might be cutting it close. Rebecca nodded grimly. Everything about this mission was operating at the edge of acceptable margins: fuel, time, weather, and aircraft performance. Success would require not just technical skill but also perfect judgment and a little luck. As they continued toward Creech Air Force Base, Rebecca maintained constant communication with Captain Rodriguez, monitoring the U-2's condition and providing guidance on maintaining the delicate balance between airspeed and altitude that kept the damaged aircraft controllable. Dragon Lady, how are you holding up physically? I know fighting those controls is exhausting. Captain Rodriguez's voice showed strain but remained professional. Falcon Lead, I'm getting tired, but I can maintain control for the approach. My bigger concern is that the wing flutter seems to be getting worse as we descend into denser air. Rebecca looked closely at the U-2's left wing and confirmed Captain Rodriguez's assessment. The structural vibrations were becoming more pronounced as the aircraft encountered the thicker atmosphere at lower altitude. They were racing against time before the wing structure failed completely. Dragon Lady, we're going to start our approach to Creech in 10 minutes. I need you to be ready for precise throttle and control inputs. This approach has to be perfect because we won't get a second chance. As Creech Air Force Base appeared in the distance, Rebecca began planning what would be one of the most challenging approach procedures ever attempted, guiding a severely damaged, high-altitude aircraft to a safe landing in deteriorating weather conditions, with both aircraft operating at the limits of their performance envelopes. As Rebecca guided the formation toward Creech Air Force Base, her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission that would change everything about the mission. The voice belonged to Dr. Wells, speaking from Edwards with an urgency that immediately commanded attention. Falcon Lead, this is Dr. Wells at Edwards Engineering. I need to speak with you immediately on the secure frequency Zulu 7 Alpha. This is classified information critical to your mission. Rebecca switched to the encrypted channel, her mind racing with possibilities. Dr. Wells, Falcon Lead unsecure. What's your traffic? Dr. Wells' voice carried a tension that Rebecca had never heard before. Captain Thompson, the U-2 you're attempting to rescue isn't carrying atmospheric research equipment. According to classified documents I've just been shown, that aircraft is loaded with experimental weapons guidance systems that were being tested at high altitude. Rebecca felt her blood chill as the implication sank in. Dr. Wells, what kind of weapon systems? Advanced targeting technology for next-generation nuclear delivery systems. The equipment on that U-2 represents 15 years of classified research and development. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could compromise national security for decades. The radio fell silent except for static as Rebecca processed this information. Captain Rodriguez and Dr. Patterson weren't just civilians in distress, they were carrying some of the most sensitive military technology ever developed. Dr. Wells, who else knows about this? Rebecca asked, though she suspected the answer would complicate the mission even further. That's the problem, Captain. The mission was compartmentalized to prevent security leaks, but someone has been monitoring our communications. We have intelligence suggesting that foreign agents are already moving toward the area, attempting to recover the technology if the aircraft crashes. Rebecca's tactical training kicked in as she realized the mission had transformed from rescue operation to national security crisis. Dr. Wells, what are my orders? Dr. Wells paused before responding, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of presidential authority. Captain Thompson, you are now operating under the National Command Authority. Your primary mission is to ensure that U-2 and its cargo reach secure American territory. The secondary mission is preservation of life. You are authorized to use any means necessary to accomplish this objective. Captain Barnes, who had been monitoring the secure frequency, keyed his radio with obvious concern. Rivet, what exactly does any means necessary include? Before Rebecca could respond, her threat warning system began emitting the distinctive tone that indicated radar lock from an unknown source. Through her heads-up display, she could see multiple aircraft signatures approaching from the north at high speed. Control, Falcon Lead. I'm showing 4 unidentified aircraft approaching our position. Bearing 015 degrees, range 40 miles and closing fast. Request immediate identification. The response from Edwards Control carried a barely controlled alarm. Falcon Lead, those aircraft are not showing proper identification codes. We're tracking them as unknown hostile contacts. Be advised, you are authorized to engage if they threaten your mission. Rebecca felt her heart rate accelerate as she realized the rescue mission had become a combat situation. Foreign agents weren't just moving toward the area. They were already airborne and closing on the damaged U-2. Dragon Lady, Falcon Lead, we have hostile aircraft inbound. I need you to maintain your current heading and altitude. Do not deviate from our flight path regardless of what happens around you. Captain Rodriguez's voice showed the strain of her situation. Falcon Lead, I understand. But I don't know how much longer I can maintain control. The wing flutter is getting worse, and I'm having trouble keeping the aircraft level. Rebecca studied her tactical display, calculating intercept times and engagement options. The hostile aircraft were closing rapidly and would reach firing range within minutes. She had to make a decision that would determine not just the success of the mission, but potentially the balance of international military power. Barnes, take position between the Dragon Lady and the incoming hostiles. I'm going to attempt an intercept. Captain Barnes immediately maneuvered his F-4 into a protective position relative to the U-2. Rivet. Those are MiG-29s based on their radar signature. They're fast, maneuverable, and carrying air-to-air missiles. Rebecca armed her own weapons systems her hands moving automatically through the procedures she had practiced thousands of times, but never used in actual combat. The F-4 Phantom was an older aircraft compared to the approaching MiGs, but it was equipped with proven weapon systems and flown by pilots with superior training. Control: Falcon Lead engaging hostile aircraft. Maintain emergency support for the Dragon Lady rescue operation. Rebecca accelerated her F-4 toward the approaching MiGs, climbing to gain altitude advantage while maintaining visual contact with the U-2. The tactical situation was complex. She had to engage multiple enemy aircraft while protecting a damaged, friendly aircraft that could neither defend itself nor maneuver evasively. The lead MiG opened fire at maximum range, sending air-to-air missiles streaking across the desert sky. Rebecca deployed chaff and flares while executing evasive maneuvers, her years of training taking over as she fought for position against the enemy fighters. "Falcon Lead engaged," she announced over the radio, launching her own missiles at the lead MiG. The enemy pilot was skilled, executing a series of defensive maneuvers that defeated Rebecca's first attack, but the engagement forced him to break off his approach toward the U-2. Captain Barnes found himself in a dogfight with two MiGs that had tried to flank the formation. His F-4 was heavier and less maneuverable than the enemy aircraft, but his experience and tactical knowledge allowed him to hold his own in aerial combat. "Rivet, I've got two bandits on my tail, but I'm keeping them away from the Dragon Lady. You need to finish this quickly. Our fuel situation is getting critical." Rebecca realized that the enemy pilots were employing a sophisticated strategy. They weren't just trying to shoot down the U-2. They were attempting to force it to crash in a location where they could recover the classified technology. The aerial combat was secondary to their primary objective of capturing the weapon's guidance systems. As she maneuvered for another attack on the lead MiG, Rebecca noticed something that changed her understanding of the entire situation. The enemy aircraft weren't just MiG-29s. They were carrying electronic warfare equipment that explained how they had located the U-2 despite its stealth characteristics. "Control, Falcon Lead. The hostile aircraft are equipped with advanced electronic surveillance systems. They've been tracking our communications and following the Dragon Lady's electronic signature." Wells' voice came over the secure frequency with information that made the situation even more complex. "Captain Thompson, intelligence indicates that the technology on the U-2 includes defensive systems that could protect it from missile attack. Dr. Patterson knows how to activate these systems, but it requires specific flight conditions." Rebecca processed this information while continuing her engagement with the MiGs. If the U-2 had defensive capabilities, it might be able to protect itself, but only if Captain Rodriguez could maintain the precise flight parameters required for the systems to function. "Dragon Lady, do you copy Dr. Wells' transmission about defensive systems?" Captain Rodriguez responded immediately. "Falcon Lead, Dr. Patterson is working on activating the defensive suite, but he needs the aircraft to maintain steady flight for 60 seconds. I don't know if I can hold it that stable with these control problems." Rebecca realized that she had to buy time for the U-2 to activate its defenses while preventing the MiGs from getting close enough to shoot it down. The tactical situation required perfect coordination between multiple aircraft operating at the limits of their capabilities. "Barnes, can you maintain a defensive position for 1 minute? I'm going to try to draw the MiGs away from the Dragon Lady." "Roger that, Rivet. I'll keep them off the U-2, but you better make this work." Rebecca executed a high-speed climb that forced the enemy fighters to follow her, drawing them away from the vulnerable U-2. Her forward's twin engines provided superior power-to-weight ratio at altitude, allowing her to outclimb the MiGs in force them into a disadvantageous position. As she reached the apex of her climb and prepared to reverse direction for another attack, Rebecca heard Dr. Patterson's voice over the radio for the first time. "Falcon Lead, defensive systems are online. The Dragon Lady now has limited protection from missile attack, but we still need to reach friendly territory for recovery operations. The activation of the U-2's defensive systems immediately changed the tactical situation. The MiGs found their missiles ineffective against the Dragon Lady, but they continued their pursuit, apparently hoping to force the aircraft down in enemy-controlled territory. Rebecca dove back into the combat, her tactical advantage now improved by the knowledge that the U-2 could defend itself. She engaged the MiGs with renewed aggression, using her aircraft's capabilities and her superior training to gradually gain the upper hand in the aerial battle. One by one, the enemy fighters were forced to break off their attack as Rebecca and Barnes systematically defeated their attempts to intercept the U-2. The MiGs had superior maneuverability, but the F-4 pilots had better training, superior tactics, and the motivation that came from protecting classified American technology. As the last MiG disappeared toward the horizon, trailing smoke from battle damage, Rebecca felt a surge of professional satisfaction. But the mission was far from over. The U-2 was still critically damaged, fuel was running low on both F-4 South, and they still had to execute the most challenging part of the entire operation, landing the Dragon Lady safely at Creech Air Force Base. Control, Falcon Lead. Hostile aircraft have been neutralized. Continuing mission to bring Dragon Lady home. Dr. Wells' voice carried obvious relief. Outstanding work, Captain Thompson. But be advised that intelligence suggests additional hostile forces may be converging on Creech Air Force Base. You need to get that U-2 on the ground immediately. Rebecca looked ahead toward Creech, where she could see dust clouds rising from the runway as ground crews prepared for the emergency landing. The approaching storm system had reached the base, creating the challenging weather conditions that would make the landing attempt even more difficult. Dragon Lady, how are you holding up? We're 15 minutes from touchdown. Captain Rodriguez's voice showed the strain of fighting her aircraft's controls for over 2 hours. Falcon Lead, I'm exhausted, but I can make it. The defensive systems seem to have stabilized some of the aircraft's flight characteristics. Dr. Patterson thinks the technology is helping with flight control as well as missile defense. Rebecca realized that the classified weapons guidance systems weren't just defensive, they included flight stability technology that was keeping the U-2 controllable despite its mechanical problems. The mission had revealed capabilities that even Dr. Wells and the engineering staff hadn't fully understood. As they approached Creech Air Force Base for what would be one of the most challenging landing attempts in aviation history, Rebecca reflected on how much the mission had changed since launch. What had started as a simple rescue operation had become a complex national security crisis involving classified technology, international espionage, and aerial combat. But the most difficult part still lay ahead. Getting the U-2 safely on the ground would require every bit of skill, knowledge, and determination that Rebecca had developed over her flying career. The lives of Captain Rodriguez and Dr. Patterson, along with some of America's most sensitive military secrets, depended on her ability to guide the damaged aircraft through a precision approach in deteriorating weather conditions. Dragon Lady, Falcon Lead, welcome to the hardest part of our day. Let's bring you home. 10 miles from Creech Air Force Base, Rebecca's fuel warning light illuminated with an amber glow that sent a chill through her professional composure. The aerial combat with the MiGs had consumed far more fuel than planned, and both F-4 Phantoms were now operating with reserves that left no margin for error. Barnes, what's your fuel state? Rebecca asked, though she suspected the answer would confirm her worst fears. Rivet, I'm showing 12 minutes of fuel remaining at current consumption. If we need to execute a go-around or missed approach, we won't have enough gas to reach an alternate field. Rebecca quickly calculated their options while maintaining formation with the struggling U-2. Creech Air Force Base was their only viable destination, which meant the landing approach had to be perfect on the first attempt. Any complications or delays would result in fuel exhaustion for both F-4s. Dragon. Lady, what's your current fuel situation? Captain Rodriguez's response revealed another critical factor. Falcon lead. Dr. Patterson has been monitoring our fuel systems. The leak we discovered earlier has stabilized, but we're showing approximately 22 minutes of fuel remaining. However, the fuel distribution system is damaged, so we might lose engine power without warning. Rebecca realized that all three aircraft were operating at the absolute edge of their fuel reserves. The margin for error had disappeared completely, making the upcoming landing attempt a race against time with potentially catastrophic consequences for failure. Through her canopy, Rebecca could see Creech Air Force Base emerging from the desert. Haze, its runways creating geometric patterns against the brown landscape. But she could also see the approaching storm system, a massive wall of dust and turbulence that would reach the base within minutes. Control, Falcon lead requesting immediate weather update for Creech. We need current wind conditions and visibility reports. Falcon lead, Creech control copies. Current conditions are winds 280 degrees at 35 knots gusting to 48 knots. Visibility 2 miles in blowing dust. Ceiling 800 feet broken clouds. Conditions are deteriorating rapidly with the approaching storm front. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten as she processed the weather information. Landing a damaged U-2 Dragon Lady in gusty crosswinds would be extremely challenging under ideal circumstances. With the aircraft's compromised flight controls and limited fuel, the approach would require precision that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Dragon Lady, we're going to execute a straight-in approach to runway 08. I need you to configure for landing as early as possible and maintain precise airspeed control. The crosswinds are going to be significant. Dr. Patterson's voice came over the radio with technical information that provided both hope and concern. Falcon lead. The defensive systems we activated earlier include flight stability augmentation. I can configure the technology to assist with approach and landing, but it will require specific flight parameters to function properly. Rebecca's aerospace engineering background allowed her to understand the implications immediately. Dr. Patterson, what flight parameters do you need? The system works best with a steady descent rate and minimal control inputs. If Captain Rodriguez can maintain 500 feet per minute descent and avoid abrupt control movements, the technology will help stabilize the aircraft during approach. Rebecca began planning the approach profile that would accommodate both the U-2 stability requirements and the challenging weather conditions. The crosswinds would require significant drift correction, but the flight stability system needed smooth, consistent flight inputs to function effectively. Barnes, I need you to position on the U-2's upwind side during approach. If the Dragon Lady gets into trouble, you might be able to provide wind shielding with your aircraft's wake turbulence. Captain Barnes acknowledged and began maneuvering into position. His V-4's larger mass and twin engines would create a wake pattern that could potentially reduce the crosswind effect on the U-2, but the formation flying required during approach would be extremely demanding. As they established the approach corridor, Rebecca's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from Dr. Wells at Edwards. Falcon lead. Satellite intelligence shows multiple vehicles converging on Creech Air Force Base from the north and east. These appear to be hostile ground forces, attempting to intercept the technology if the aircraft crashes. Rebecca felt her tactical situation becoming impossibly complex. Not only did she have to execute a precision landing in deteriorating weather with critically low fuel, but enemy ground forces were positioning themselves to capture the classified technology if anything went wrong. Control, what ground security is available at Creech? Falcon lead, Creech has minimal security forces. We're scrambling additional personnel from Nellis, but they won't arrive for 30 minutes. You need to get that U-2 on the ground and secured immediately. Rebecca realized that the landing approach would be conducted under potential enemy observation, with hostile forces ready to move if the aircraft crashed or landed in an accessible location. The pressure to execute a perfect approach had increased exponentially. "Dragon Lady, Dr. Patterson, can your defensive systems function on the ground? If we're facing hostile ground forces, we might need protection after landing." Dr. Patterson's response revealed capabilities that even Rebecca hadn't anticipated. Falcon Lead. The systems include ground-based defensive modes, but they require external power connections available only at secure facilities. Once we land, the aircraft will be vulnerable until we can establish proper power and data links. Rebecca studied the approach path to Creech, noting the terrain features and potential defensive positions that enemy forces might use. The base was surrounded by open desert that provided excellent visibility but limited cover for defending against ground attack. "Control, I recommend positioning the U-2 in the most secure area of the base after landing. We need to minimize exposure to potential ground assault." Falcon Lead, Roger. "We're clearing the secure hangar complex for immediate aircraft recovery. Ground crews are standing by with specialized equipment for the classified cargo." As they began the final approach phase, Rebecca noticed that the storm system was arriving faster than predicted. Dust clouds were already reducing visibility at the base, and she could see debris being blown across the runway by the increasing winds. "Dragon Lady, we need to accelerate our approach timeline. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly, and we have hostile forces in the area. Are you ready for immediate landing?" Captain Rodriguez's voice showed the strain of over 2 hours of fighting damaged flight controls. "Falcon Lead, I'm as ready as I'll ever be. Dr. Patterson has the stability systems configured for approach. Just guide me in." Rebecca armed her F-4's remaining weapon systems as a precaution against ground-based threats. If enemy forces attempted to interfere with the landing, she would need to provide defensive fire support while maintaining formation with the U-2. "Barnes, maintain close formation during approach, but be ready to break off and engage ground targets if necessary. We can't let hostile forces interfere with the Dragon Lady's landing." Captain Barnes acknowledged while checking his own weapon status. Both F-4 South were now operating in a multi-role capacity, serving simultaneously as formation flight leaders, navigation aides, and potential ground attack aircraft. The final approach began with Rebecca guiding the U-2 into the landing corridor while monitoring wind conditions, fuel consumption, and potential threats from multiple directions. The crosswinds were pushing all 3 aircraft off course, requiring constant corrections that tested the limits of formation flying precision. "Dragon Lady, reduce power gradually and configure for landing. Maintain 500 feet per minute descent." As requested by Dr. Patterson, Rebecca watched as the U-2's landing gear extended and the aircraft configured for its landing attempt. From her position alongside the Dragon Lady, she could see that Captain Rodriguez was fighting constant control. Inputs to maintain the approach path. "Falcon Lead, the aircraft feels more stable with the landing gear extended," Captain Rodriguez reported. "Dr. Patterson says the stability systems are functioning properly, but I still need significant control input to maintain course." Rebecca noted that the U-2's approach was becoming increasingly difficult as they descended into the turbulent air near the ground. The crosswinds were creating wind shear conditions that challenged even the aircraft's advanced stability systems. "Barnes, move in closer. The Dragon Lady needs all the wind protection we can provide." Captain Barnes tightened his formation position until his F-4 was less than 50 feet from the U-2's right wingtip. The close proximity was dangerous, but it created a pocket of relatively calm air that helped stabilize the Dragon Lady's approach. Through her heads-up display, Rebecca could see Creech's runway approaching rapidly. The base's crash and rescue equipment was positioned along the runway, ready to respond if the landing attempt failed. She could also see security vehicles moving into defensive positions around the perimeter. Control, Falcon Lead. We have the runway in sight. Dragon Lady is configured for landing with 2 minutes of fuel remaining. This is our only approach opportunity. Falcon Lead, Creech Tower. Runway is clear. Winds 290 at 42 gusting to 55. You are cleared to land. Emergency equipment is standing by. Rebecca felt her heart rate increase as they entered the final phase of the approach. Everything they had worked for during the past 3 hours came down to the next 90 seconds. Captain Rodriguez had to execute a perfect landing in challenging weather conditions with a damaged aircraft, while Rebecca and Barnes provided formation support despite their own fuel limitations. Dragon Lady, you're looking good. Maintain current approach angle and airspeed. 50 feet, 30 feet, 20 feet. The U-2's main landing gear touched the runway with a screech of tires against concrete, but the aircraft immediately began to drift sideways due to the crosswind. Captain Rodriguez fought to maintain directional control as the Dragon Lady rolled down the runway at high speed. Dragon Lady, keep the nose straight. You're doing great. The U-2's nose gear finally touched down, and Captain Rodriguez applied brakes while fighting to keep the aircraft on the runway centerline. The crosswinds continued to push the Dragon Lady sideways, but the aircraft's momentum and Captain Rodriguez's skill kept it tracking straight. Falcon Lead, Dragon Lady is down and rolling, Captain Rodriguez announced with obvious relief in her voice. But Rebecca's relief was short-lived as her fuel warning system began emitting the urgent tone that indicated imminent fuel exhaustion. Both F-4s needed to land immediately, and the runway was occupied by the slowly decelerating U-2. Control. Falcon Lead declaring fuel emergency. We need immediate runway access for 2 F-4s. Falcon Lead, the Dragon Lady is clearing the runway now. You are cleared for immediate landing, both aircraft. Rebecca and Barnes executed a formation landing approach with their fuel gauges showing empty. As their F-4s touched down and rolled to a stop, Rebecca realized they had accomplished something that should have been impossible: a successful rescue mission involving classified technology, aerial combat, and precision formation flying under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The moment Rebecca's F-4 Phantom rolled to a stop on Creech's taxiway, her threat warning system erupted with alarms that sent ice through her veins. Multiple ground-based radar signatures were painting her aircraft from positions around the base perimeter, and the electronic warfare display showed active jamming attempts against the base's communication systems. Control, Falcon Lead, I'm showing multiple hostile radar contacts surrounding the base. The enemy ground forces are already in position and actively engaging our electronics. The response from Creech Tower crackled through heavy static as enemy jamming interfered with radio communications. Falcon Lead. Multiple vehicles. North and east. Unknown weapons. Dragon Lady. Secure hangar. Rebecca's cockpit displays flickered as electromagnetic interference disrupted her aircraft systems. Through her canopy, she could see the U-2 Dragon Lady being towed rapidly toward the secure hangar complex. Ground crews working with desperate urgency to get the classified aircraft under cover. Captain Barnes, whose F-4 had landed immediately behind Rebecca, transmitted on their tactical frequency. Rivet, I count at least 8 vehicles in firing positions around the base. This isn't a recovery operation, it's a coordinated assault. Rebecca shut down her engines and prepared for immediate departure from her aircraft. The F-4s needed to be refueled and rearmed if they were going to provide defensive support. But first, she had to assess the tactical situation and coordinate with base security forces. As she climbed down from her cockpit, Rebecca was met by Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Creech's base commander, who had been monitoring the situation from the control tower. Captain Thompson, we have a serious problem. Those vehicles aren't just conducting surveillance. They're equipped with anti-aircraft missiles and are positioned to prevent any aircraft from leaving this base. Rebecca studied the tactical display that Colonel Mitchell provided, noting the sophisticated positioning of the enemy forces. They had established overlapping fields of fire that covered all runway approaches, while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid immediate engagement by base security forces. "Colonel, what defensive capabilities do we have available?" "Limited," Mitchell replied grimly. "Creech is primarily a drone operations base with minimal defensive armament. We have small arms and a few crew-served weapons, but nothing that can engage vehicles at extended range." Dr. Patterson approached from the hangar where the U-2 was being secured, carrying a briefcase that Rebecca recognized contained technical documentation for the classified systems. "Captain Thompson, the weapons guidance technology we've been carrying includes defensive capabilities that could neutralize the ground threats, but it requires specific activation procedures." Rebecca felt a surge of hope mixed with concern. "Dr. Patterson, what kind of defensive capabilities?" Dr. Patterson opened his briefcase and showed Rebecca technical diagrams that made her eyes widen. The guidance systems include electronic warfare capabilities designed to disable enemy vehicle electronics at extended range. Essentially, we can shut down their weapons systems and communications simultaneously. Captain Rodriguez, who had finally emerged from the U-2 after her harrowing flight, joined the group with information that changed the tactical situation completely. "There's something else you need to know. During our flight, I observed the enemy vehicles through the U-2 surveillance equipment. They're not just carrying anti-aircraft missiles, they have equipment for capturing and downloading classified data from disabled aircraft." Rebecca realized that the enemy forces weren't planning to destroy the U-2 and its technology. They intended to capture it intact and extract the classified information. This meant that a defensive battle would be necessary to prevent one of America's most sensitive military secrets from falling into foreign hands. "Dr. Patterson, how quickly can you activate the defensive systems?" "The technology requires a direct data link between the U-2 and ground-based computing systems. We need approximately 15 minutes to establish the connection and configure the defensive parameters." Colonel Mitchell checked her watch with obvious concern. "Captain Thompson, my security forces report that the enemy vehicles are preparing for an assault. We might not have 15 minutes. Rebecca's tactical training kicked in as she analyzed the situation. The enemy forces had superior numbers and weapons, but they were positioned for a siege rather than immediate assault. If she could delay their attack long enough for Dr. Patterson to activate the defensive systems, the classified technology itself might provide the means for defeating the enemy. "Colonel Mitchell, I need immediate refueling for both F-4 South. If the ground-based defenses aren't ready in time, we'll need to provide close air support." "Captain, the enemy has anti-aircraft missiles. Flying close air support against prepared positions would be extremely dangerous." Rebecca smiled grimly as she studied the enemy vehicle positions. "Colonel, dangerous is a relative term. Those missiles are designed to engage high-altitude aircraft. If we stay low and use terrain masking, we can probably avoid their engagement envelope." Captain Barnes, who had been monitoring enemy communications on his aircraft's electronic warfare equipment, approached with intelligence that confirmed Rebecca's assessment. "Rivet, the hostiles are using shoulder-fired missiles with limited range and altitude capability. If we maintain low-level flight profiles, we should be able to engage them effectively." Dr. Patterson activated a portable computer terminal and began establishing the data link with the U-2 systems. "Captain Thompson, I'm initiating the defensive system startup sequence. The technology is extremely sophisticated, but it requires precise calibration to avoid interfering with friendly electronics." Rebecca watched the setup process while maintaining awareness of the tactical situation developing around the base. Through binoculars, she could see enemy personnel moving into assault positions, their weapons and equipment indicating professional military training rather than irregular forces. Dr. Patterson, what's the range and effectiveness of the defensive systems? The electronic warfare capabilities can disable vehicle electronics at ranges up to 5 kilometers. However, the system can also disrupt friendly electronics within a similar radius, so we need to coordinate carefully with base systems. Colonel Mitchell activated the base's emergency communication system, using landline connections that would be immune to electronic interference. All personnel, this is Base Commander. We are implementing total electronic emissions control in 10 minutes. All non-essential electronics will be shut down to avoid interference with defensive systems. Rebecca realized that once the defensive systems activated, both friendly and enemy forces would be operating with limited electronic capabilities. The tactical advantage would shift to whichever side could adapt most quickly to non-electronic warfare methods. Barnes, we need to pre-position our F-4 south for immediate takeoff once the electronic warfare phase is complete. If the defensive systems don't neutralize all enemy vehicles, we'll need to engage the remainder conventionally. Captain Barnes began coordinating with ground crews to expedite the refueling and rearming process. The F-4 South would be loaded with conventional bombs and rockets specifically designed for ground attack missions, transforming them from interceptors into close air support aircraft. As Dr. Patterson continued working on the defensive system activation, Rebecca noticed movement from the enemy vehicle positions. Several teams were advancing on foot toward the base perimeter, apparently attempting to breach the defensive line before the electronic warfare systems could be activated. Colonel Mitchell, we have enemy infantry approaching the north fence line. They're trying to get inside our defensive perimeter. Colonel Mitchell immediately dispatched security teams to intercept the advancing enemy forces, but Rebecca realized that a conventional firefight around the base would put the classified aircraft and technology at risk from stray fire or explosive devices. Dr. Patterson, can you accelerate the activation timeline? We're about to have enemy forces inside the base perimeter. Dr. Patterson's hands moved rapidly over his computer keyboard as he attempted to expedite the complex calibration process. Captain Thompson, I can reduce the setup time to 8 minutes, but that will decrease the system's effectiveness and increase the risk of interfering with friendly electronics. Rebecca made the tactical decision without hesitation. Do it. 8 minutes of reduced effectiveness is better than having enemy forces capture the technology. The base's defensive situation deteriorated rapidly as enemy infantry breached the perimeter fence at multiple locations. Small arms fire erupted around the hangar complex as Creech security forces engaged the advancing hostiles, but the enemy had superior numbers and training. Captain Rodriguez, despite her exhaustion from the challenging flight, picked up her rifle and joined the defensive effort. Captain Thompson, I'm not letting these people capture the aircraft I nearly died bringing home. Rebecca felt a surge of respect for the U-2 pilot's determination, but she was more concerned about protecting the civilian scientist, who was their only hope of activating the defensive systems. Dr. Patterson, how much more time do you need? 4 minutes for minimal defensive capability, 6 minutes for full effectiveness. The sound of gunfire was getting closer to the hangar as enemy forces systematically advanced through the base's defensive positions. Rebecca realized that conventional defensive tactics would not be sufficient to protect the classified technology for the time required. Barnes, are the F-4 South ready for immediate launch? Rivet, we have fuel and basic armament, but not the full ground attack loadout. We can provide some fire support, but it won't be optimal. Rebecca made a decision that went against every tactical doctrine she had learned. We're launching immediately. Sometimes you have to work with what you have rather than what you want. She ran toward her F-4, performing the fastest pre-flight inspection of her career while ground crews completed final Preparations. The aircraft system showed green across the board, but she had no time for her usual comprehensive checks. Captain Barnes was already strapping into his cockpit, his aircraft positioned for immediate takeoff. Rivet, this is going to be interesting. Low-level attack runs in confined airspace with minimal ordnance. Rebecca started her engines and began the fastest taxi and takeoff sequence she had ever attempted. The F-4 lifted off from Creech's runway, just as Dr. Patterson announced over the radio that the defensive systems were coming online. All personnel. Electronic warfare activation in 30 seconds. Shut down all non-essential electronics immediately. Rebecca climbed to 500 feet and began her attack run on the enemy vehicle positions. Her aircraft's weapons systems locked onto the first target. But as she prepared to fire, every electronic system in her cockpit suddenly went dark. Dr. Patterson's defensive technology had activated successfully, but it had also disabled every electronic system within 5 kilometers, including the avionics. On both F-4 Phantoms, Rebecca found herself flying a multi-million-dollar fighter aircraft with nothing but basic flight instruments and manual flight controls. Barnes, do you copy? Rebecca transmitted on her backup radio, the only communication. System unaffected by the electronic warfare field. Roger, Rivet. I'm flying on backup instruments only. This is definitely not covered in the flight manual. Rebecca looked down at the base and saw that the electronic warfare system was working exactly as designed. Enemy vehicles had stopped moving, their electronic systems disabled by the defensive technology. But enemy infantry was still advancing, apparently unaffected by the electronic disruption. Dr. Patterson, the defensive system stopped the vehicles, but the infantry is still operational. Dr. Patterson's voice came over the backup radio with information that would determine the final outcome of the battle. Captain Thompson, the electronic warfare field will maintain effectiveness for exactly 12 minutes before the system requires recharging. You have 12 minutes to neutralize the remaining threats using conventional methods. Rebecca realized that the ultimate test of her flying skills was about to begin. She had to conduct precision ground attack missions using manual flight controls and backup instruments, engaging enemy forces that were advancing on the most classified military technology in American inventory. The next 12 minutes would determine not just the success of the mission, but potentially the balance of international military power for decades to come. Flying at 500 feet, with nothing but backup instruments, Rebecca lined up her F-4 Phantom for the most challenging attack run of her career. Below, enemy infantry was advancing through Creech's defensive positions, while their disabled vehicle sat motionless, victims of Dr. Patterson's electronic warfare technology. She had 11 minutes and 40 seconds to neutralize the remaining threats using manual flight controls and visual navigation. Barnes, take the eastern approach vector. I'll engage the forces near the hangar complex. Remember, we're flying these birds like it's 1943, no electronics, no computers, just stick and rudder flying. Captain Barnes acknowledged and banked his F-4 toward the eastern perimeter, where enemy forces were attempting to flank the bases. Defensive positions. Rebecca could see muzzle flashes from multiple locations as the ground battle intensified around the hangar containing the U-2 and its classified cargo. Rebecca's first attack run required split-second timing and precision that pushed her piloting skills to their absolute limits. Using only her backup altimeter and airspeed indicator, she dove toward the enemy positions while calculating release parameters for her conventional bombs. Based on visual references and mathematical calculations, she performed mentally. At 200 feet above ground level, Rebecca released her first bomb with timing that came from years of training and an intuitive understanding of ballistics. The explosion erupted precisely between two enemy positions, neutralizing an entire squad while creating a barrier that prevented further advance toward the hangar. Direct hit, Rivet. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the backup radio from her position with the ground defense forces. You stopped their advance on the north side. Rebecca pulled her F-4 into a climbing turn, manually adjusting her throttles and flight controls while visually navigating around the base's communication towers and obstacles. Flying at low altitude without electronic navigation aids required constant vigilance and precise aircraft control. Captain Barnes executed his own attack run with equally impressive results, his bombs disrupting enemy formations on the eastern perimeter. Rivet, these manual bombing runs are actually more effective than I expected. Without electronic systems, we're harder for them to track and target. Dr. Patterson's voice crackled over the radio with updates on the defensive situation. Captain Thompson, the electronic warfare field is holding steady, but I'm detecting attempts by enemy forces to activate backup communication systems. They're adapting faster than we anticipated. Rebecca realized that the enemy forces weren't just well-equipped. They were specifically trained for operations in electronic warfare environments. Their rapid adaptation to the disabled electronics suggested military expertise that went beyond typical mercenary capabilities. Control, what's the status of friendly reinforcements from Nellis? Colonel Mitchell responded from the base command center. Falcon lead. Nellis security forces are 20 minutes out, but they're being delayed by the same electronic warfare field that's protecting us. All vehicle electronics within the affected area are non-functional. Rebecca understood the tactical implications immediately. The defensive technology that was protecting them from enemy vehicles was also preventing friendly reinforcements from approaching the base. They had to resolve the situation within the electronic warfare field's operational timeframe. As she lined up for her second attack run, Rebecca noticed that enemy forces were using hand signals and visual communication methods to coordinate their assault. Their professional adaptation to electronic warfare conditions confirmed that these weren't random attackers. They were elite military personnel specifically trained for this type of operation. Barnes, the enemy is adapting too quickly. We need to accelerate our engagement timeline. Rebecca dove her F-4 toward a concentration of enemy forces that had taken cover behind disabled vehicles, using the height and angle of her approach to maximize the effectiveness of her remaining ordnance. The manual bombing technique required her to account for wind speed, aircraft velocity, and target movement using calculations that demanded complete focus. Her second bomb struck with devastating accuracy, eliminating the enemy's command position and disrupting their coordination significantly. But as she pulled out of the dive, Rebecca saw something that made her blood run cold. Additional enemy vehicles approaching from the south, apparently unaffected by the electronic warfare field. Dr. Patterson, we have new enemy vehicles approaching from outside the electronic warfare range. How much longer until the defensive systems need recharging? Captain Thompson, 8 minutes remaining before mandatory shutdown for system recharging. The approaching vehicles will enter the effective range in approximately 6 minutes. Rebecca realized that they were facing a precisely timed enemy operation designed to exploit the limitations of the defensive technology. The second wave of enemy forces would arrive just as the electronic warfare field shut down, giving them access to the base when defensive capabilities were at their lowest. Barnes, we need to engage those approaching vehicles before they enter the electronic warfare field. Once they're inside the affected area, we won't be able to use our electronic weapon systems against them. Captain Barnes immediately altered his flight path to intercept the approaching enemy column. Roger, Rivet, I'll take the lead vehicles. You continue engaging the infantry forces already on the base. Rebecca executed a third attack run against enemy positions near the secure hangar, her precision bombing disrupting their assault on the building containing the U-2, but she could see that ground forces were being overwhelmed by the superior numbers and training of the enemy infantry. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the radio with increasing urgency. Falcon lead. Enemy forces have breached the hangar perimeter. Dr. Patterson is inside working on the defensive systems, but we can't hold them much longer. Rebecca made a decision that went against every safety protocol she had ever learned. She brought her F-4 down to less than 100 feet and executed a high-speed strafing run directly over the hangar complex, using her aircraft's cannon to engage enemy forces in close proximity to friendly personnel. The low-altitude strafing required split-second timing and absolute precision to avoid hitting friendly forces while neutralizing the enemy infantry. Rebecca's years of training and her intimate knowledge of aircraft handling characteristics allowed her to walk her cannon fire precisely along the enemy positions while avoiding any damage to the hangar or its contents. "Outstanding shooting, Rivet," Captain Rodriguez called out. "You cleared the entire north side of the hangar." But Rebecca's satisfaction was short-lived as captain. Barnes reported critical developments with the approaching enemy column. "Rivet, I've engaged the lead vehicles, but they're equipped with more sophisticated anti-aircraft systems than the first wave. I'm taking heavy ground fire and have sustained minor damage to my aircraft." Rebecca checked her watch and realized they had less than 5 minutes before the electronic warfare field shut down. Once the defensive systems recharged, Dr. Patterson would be able to reactivate them, but the 20-minute recharging cycle would leave the base vulnerable to the approaching enemy reinforcements. "Dr. Patterson, can you accelerate the recharging process?" Dr. Patterson's response revealed the critical nature of their situation. "Captain Thompson, the system cannot be safely recharged faster than 20 minutes. However, I've been analyzing the enemy's electronic signatures, and I believe I can configure the defensive technology to permanently disable their backup systems." Rebecca felt a surge of hope. "What do you need?" "I need 1 more minute to complete the reconfiguration, but the enemy forces currently in the hangar are interfering with my work. If you can clear them completely, I can implement a defensive solution that will end this threat permanently." Rebecca looked down at the hangar complex and saw that enemy forces had regrouped and were preparing a final assault on the building. She had 1 attack run remaining before her fuel and ammunition ran critically low, and she had to make it count. "Barnes, return to base immediately. I'm making the final attack run on the hangar." "Rivet, that's too dangerous. The enemy has concentrated all their remaining forces around that building." Rebecca smiled as she lined up for what would be the most precise bombing run of her career. "Barnes, I've been preparing for this shot my entire flying career." She dove her F-4 toward the hangar complex, calculating the exact release point that would neutralize the enemy forces while leaving the building and its contents undamaged. The targeting solution required mathematical precision that combined her aerospace engineering knowledge with thousands of hours of flying experience. At the precise moment when all variables aligned, altitude, airspeed, target geometry, and wind conditions, Rebecca released her final bomb. The weapon struck exactly where she had calculated, creating an explosion that eliminated the enemy forces while leaving the hangar structure intact. "Direct hit," Dr. Patterson called out. "Enemy forces neutralized, and I'm completing the defensive system reconfiguration now." As Rebecca pulled out of her dive and climbed away from the target area, Dr. Patterson activated the enhanced defensive technology. The effect was immediate and decisive. Every enemy vehicle within 10 kilometers, including the approaching reinforcements, suffered complete electronic system failure that left them permanently disabled. "All enemy forces neutralized," Dr. Patterson announced. "The enhanced defensive configuration has permanently disabled their electronic systems and communication capabilities." Rebecca brought her F-4 around for landing at Creech, her fuel gauges showing near empty, but her mission accomplished. As she touched down on the runway, she could see enemy personnel surrendering to base security forces, their vehicles and weapons rendered useless by the advanced defensive technology. Captain Barnes landed immediately behind her. his F-4 showing battle damage but still operational. "Rivet, that was the finest display of precision flying I've ever witnessed. You saved that entire operation with manual bombing techniques." As Rebecca shut down her engines and climbed out of her cockpit, she was met by Colonel Mitchell and Dr. Wells, who had arrived from Edwards during the final phase of the battle. Dr. Wells' expression showed a mixture of amazement and professional respect. "Captain Thompson, your performance today has exceeded every expectation. The precision bombing runs you executed, without electronic assistance, represent a level of piloting skill that will be studied for decades." Colonel Garrison's voice came over the base communication system as he arrived with the security reinforcements from Nellis. "All personnel, the threat has been neutralized. Captain Thompson and Captain Barnes have successfully protected classified national security assets through exceptional airmanship and tactical expertise." Dr. Patterson emerged from the hangar carrying his briefcase, the classified technology, now secure and protected. "Captain Thompson, the defensive systems you help protect today represent technology that will safeguard American military personnel for generations. Your actions have preserved capabilities that will save countless lives." Captain Rodriguez approached Rebecca with obvious gratitude. "Captain, when I was fighting to control that U-2, I never imagined that the pilot guiding me to safety would end up saving the entire mission. Your pre-flight inspection procedures and flying expertise made everything possible." Rebecca reflected on the day's events as she completed her post-flight duties. What had started as skepticism about her thorough inspection procedures had evolved into recognition of how attention to detail and technical expertise could make the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Lieutenant Harrison, who had monitored the entire mission from Edwards, approached with an expression that showed newfound respect. "Captain Thompson, I owe you an apology. Your inspection techniques and technical knowledge saved lives and protected national security. I was wrong to question your methods." Captain Mitchell added his professional assessment. "Rivet, what you accomplished today, precision formation flying, manual navigation, and accurate bombing without electronic assistance, represents airmanship at its highest level. You proved that skill and knowledge will always triumph over technology alone." As the sun set over the Nevada desert, Rebecca stood beside her F-4 Phantom and realized that her years of meticulous preparation and detailed attention to aircraft systems had culminated in a mission that validated every hour she had spent studying, training, and perfecting her craft. Dr. Wells approached with final recognition of Rebecca's contributions. "Captain Thompson, the Air Force is implementing your expanded inspection procedures across all aircraft types. Your methodology will become standard training for all pilots, ensuring that future generations have the same attention to detail that made today's success possible." The mission had proven that technical expertise, combined with courage and determination, could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Rebecca's thorough pre-flight inspections had been mocked by those who didn't understand their value. But when lives hung in the balance and national security was at stake, that attention to detail had made all the difference. As she walked away from her aircraft, Rebecca smiled at the thought that somewhere, other pilots would be conducting the same meticulous inspections she had pioneered, ensuring that when their moment of ultimate testing arrived, they would be ready to bring everyone home alive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.